I am a proud young Irishman. In Ulster's hills my life began, a happy boy through green fields ran, and kept God's and man's laws. But when my age was barely 10, my country's wrongs were told again by tens of thousands marching men, and my heart stirred to the cause. So I'll wear no convict uniform, nor meekly serve my time, that Britain might brand Ireland's fight 800 years of crime. I learned of centuries of strife, of cruel laws, injustice rife. I saw now in my own young life the fruits of foreign sway. Protesters threatened, tortured, maimed, division nurtured, passions flamed, outrage provoked, rights cause defamed. This is the conqueror's way. I'll wear no convict uniform, nor meekly...
Hello, J. Dave. Well, we're here today to have basically a Black Mountain Remembers situation, where we want to have a look back on our past and see where we have, or how we have come to where we're at here today. And what we have several Republican ex-prisoners here who want to just give a little bit of a rundown on their past. And what we'll do initially is introduce ourselves. Who am I to do it? Introduce ourselves, and then we'll have a discussion about our period of republicanism, activism, imprisonment, and subsequent. Far away.
I'm Anne-Marie Quinn. I was born and reared in the foot of the Black Mountain at the top of the White Rock Road in the greater Ballymurphy area. I was a Republican activist in the 1970s, and in 1976 was arrested in active service. From there I went on to do almost 9 years in Armagh Prison. It was there during the No Work, No Wash protests and during the hunger strikes.
Thank you. Kinda.
Sean Lannon, better known to friends and comrades as Ginta. Nobody would know me as Sean. I got involved in the Republican movement in '69, early '70s, after the whole programmes of '69, the burning of Belfast, basically. I was interned in 1972, was on the prison ship, Maidstone, and then Long Cash. Was later released in '75, was captured again in active service in '76, and on the blanket in '77 till the end of the blanket, and have been a political Republican Sinn Féin activist for all my days.
My name is Eddie Fay. I was born in Beechmont but moved to the new housing estate of Turf Lodge.
Monte Rosa.
I was first came involved in the early 70s in the Fianna Éireann. I was arrested in '76. I was sentenced to 18 years imprisonment, of which I spent over 4.5 years on the blanket protests, and basically done over just over 11 years imprisonment.
I'm Pat Sheehan. I grew up just off the Springfield Road. We moved house in 1963, and we were the third Catholic family to move into the street. And by coincidence, the other two families had RUC connections. One was a serving RUC officer. and the other was retired. In 1973, loyalists came to kill me, asked for me by name, wasn't an open fire on my father, and he, luckily enough, wasn't injured. But the upshot was that we had to up and leave the very next morning and move to Falls Road, to my granny's house, just at the corner of Rockmount Street, and then we got our own house shortly after that. I was active in the movement, ended up in prison in 1978, joined the Blanket in 1979, and participated in both the 1980 and 1981 hunger strike. I was actually the longest on the hunger strike when it ended in October 1981. I was later released in 87, rejoined the struggle, and ended up back in prison again in 89, and was released in 98 as part of the Good Friday Agreement. Had it not been for that, I'd have been in prison for another 10 years. In December 2010, I was co-opted to the Assembly to replace Gerry Adams when he went to contest elections in the South. And I've been elected 3 times since then in my own right. Shouldn't I?
Okay, thanks very much. I haven't actually said who I am. I'm Michael Culbert from Andersonstown, born on Bay Street, reared up in the front of the Springfield Road, moved to St James's, and former political prisoner, former life sentence prisoner, and it's an honour for me to be here, just sort of steering this conversation here. So what I really would like to do is to open up a conversation here about people and their various experiences. I think there's a label on all of us which is a Republican, an IRA man or an IRA woman, or a blanket man or blanket woman. But what I would like to bring out is the human and what your thinking was and how life was as human beings, as opposed to also being a Republican activist. So your experiences in the prison as a human being, you know, how was it for the like of yourself?
Well, I was brought up in a family of 10, and my father died when I was 10 years old, and he left a great influence on all of us. You know, when the British Army first came on the streets in '69, and we seen them going up the White Rock Road, and he warned us immediately that we were not to go near them, that the British Army were not here for us, you know. And as time, a few months went on, and people were giving them tea and sandwiches, and my daddy made it very, very clear that you know, this had all happened before in the 40s and 50s, and you know, the 20s, and so he was a great man for his history, for his hurling, his culture, and he spoke Irish. So we were always politically aware to a certain extent from a young age. Unfortunately, we lost his experiences very early on in 1970, and actually at his wake, one of my brothers was injured while rioting and was taken to hospital. So that was really the first. He was buried in the beginning of April 1970, and that was the first really bad rioting in Ballymurphy. So then my experiences from I was young, that was from 10-year-old, and as the years went on, then a couple of years later was the internment and the bombing of Kelly's Bar and the Ballymurphy massacre and the West Rock Spring Hill massacre. And besides that, living in Ballymurphy was like a war zone every day, really.
So every day was a political
we
awareness?
lived basically a few yards from Kelly's Bar, and when it was blown up, two of my brothers had been working on it at the time. It would have been their night job, basically. So you couldn't help but be politically influenced. And to me personally, it was very simple. Geographically and historically, Ireland is an island. It's not part of Britain. It's not part of Spain. It's not part of any other country. Ireland is an independent country, and it should never have been, you know, split from the 26 counties in 1921. So to me, that was all very obvious. So the next step was, to me, was a very easy one, was to become part of the Republican movement. And I was a member of Common Naman, the women's part of the Irish Republican Army. And that was, at the same time, I had got a few GCSEs, at that time it was called GCEs, left school and got a job in the Northern Ireland Electricity Service. So I used to go over to the Malone Road to work every day. And where I worked in the electricity service was very fancy. You know, they had their own bank and their own canteen and their own wee surgery if you got sunburn on their lawns. And it was lovely wee number. So I went from that basically working there for over a year, to then being arrested in active service down at off York Street and Great George's Street. And from there I went from Grand Central Hotel to Musgrave Park and Town Hall Street, and badly abused at the time when I was arrested with a comrade, Paul Brennan, who had to be taken out to hospital when he had stopped breathing with the amount of beatings he got when he was arrested. So I went from there to Armagh Jail. So my impression of Armagh Jail, going from, we always had a very happy, comfortable home, so we had, and my mother made sure of that. And to go from there and the electricity service and into Armagh Jail, which was basically an archaic building. It was a Victorian building. It was ancient. It was dark. It was really, I found it horrendous. My first view of it when I went in, was all bars and cat wire and, you know, the iron stairs. But within 24 hours or by the next morning, you're one of the old comrades and you're running about and doing your thing and you're getting back into, you know, the activities of Republicans within prison. And so...
Fair call. Kenty, you wouldn't have been able to escape the call of the Republican family. I would know a little bit about your family background. Would that be a reasonable...
Well, it wouldn't mean it was already. We grew up within a Republican family. My mother was involved in Come the Morning in the 40s and the 50s. My grandest brothers were well known, Blackdown O'Toole. Blackdown was very active in the island of Ireland, was involved in some notorious operations down in the Free State and up here. So, the Republicans was always spoke about in my family. I say my aunt Maureen Firm was very heavily involved in Come the Morning.
Also my aunt.
And also your aunt too was in charge of Come the Morning in Belfast for a number of years. So the fact was that when we grew up in my mother always sung Republican songs. She loved the Tom Williams song because I was born in the Kessler in Compost Street, a couple of doors from where Tom Williams was shot and found down at, I think it was Mara Drums or Murray Moore's house. So basically 69 came and we got involved in the Ratton Down Road defence of the communities, you know. So I basically lived from then. I lived down the falls and around the barricades, basically slept in the barricades for months and months. My family never seen me. Me in a couple of hours, we got to know the likes of the Gillens, Dempsey's, Fran McCann, all the MPs. So we're basically at the fence on the bar. And then went back up in the Andy Town, and then I was asked to stay in Andy Town, not to go back down the road again. So basically we got involved in the structures up in Andersonstown, started organising Andersonstown. Then it was captured and interned on the Maidstone. And that was my first impression of the prison, which wasn't a nice one. You know, coming in the internment was different. The Maidstone, for people that wasn't on it, was a horrible, horrible place. And we lived down in the hole in under. Wee small portholes where most of them were blocked up with bars for obvious reasons, but it didn't stop the boys getting out and escaping anyway, 7 of them. But you were living down the hole, you had maybe 100 people down there, and the smell was horrendous. There was no air conditioning, the food was total rubbish. You were lying in wired beds, it was against the wall. If you happened to be in the top bunk, which was through a tap, you know, when you were lying in your bed, your nose was literally hitting the top of the thing, you know. So then you were held on there for about 4 or 5 weeks, what they called detention, and then you were either released or interned, depending on how. So I ended up getting interned and was flew up till Long Kesh, and coming in over in the chapels that brought you up, and that itself is a journey in its own was horrifying because the Brits knew right, like, never in a plane in my life, never flew, and the 2 doors open on our side, it seemed they're coming round, they're tilting right down, you're sitting hanging on for fear of falling out, and the Brits are all laughing, but down into the cache, when I get into the cache, it was a different ball game entirely. Even then, we controlled the cages. Screws had no control whatsoever. Once you went into the cages, there was a command structure within there. Screws come into the cages when they were told to come into the cages. or that they asked permission to come in, other than the British Army coming in and raiding, which they'd have done at 4 or 5 in the morning, they'd have just kicked the doors in. But the cages was all the structure set up. You know, we can throw the cages with full political status, so it wasn't an issue whatsoever around any of that. You know, so I got released then from internment in 74, 75. Actually, 3 days before they burnt it down, me and Dipper Dempsey got released. Well, the only two were in the car park. We hadn't even got a lift, though. There's the Quakers brought us home, give us a lift down the road. And then when I got into my house, my family were a wedding in Downpatrick, so that was a welcome I got. I got home, there was nobody there. But I was down the morning fair play the morning there. Yeah, but that's what it was, the bond, the place. So I got re-involved in the struggle again and was captured again in active service in late 76, sentenced in October, I think 77, and from there on the blanket till the end. Get back out of it, got re-involved again, and was arrested again and charged with 2 corporals in Anderson Town Road. Spent another 18 months there, beat that on appeal. So coming back out again, that was me back into the struggle. In jail, I mean, politics, you know, I have to say, you know, I mean, my generation of Republicans, I think any of them agree ourselves, because see, we were brought up on a diet of militarism. There was no politics. You know, when we were interned, there was a stage, and the leadership within the jail were very, in the 30s and 40s, men, very right-wing, Catholic-oriented. You know, books, any books to do with socialism and Marxism. You know, I mind them actually taking them off us and burning them. You know what I mean? A friend of mine, Phil McCulloch, was getting chastised every day of the week for it because Phil was just mad. You know, so that's the type of thing there was. It was just militarism. So that's that we were brought up on. When on the blanket, and in turn you started dabbling in politics, people started talking about elections, and people were weird. I'd have been one of the sort of the skeptical ones, elections, not a chance, you know. But so there was that whole education through the jails that brought me around from basically that's what it was just the old attitude. I'm a soldier, not a politician. That used to be the war cry of us, you know, which when you look back on it now, it's totally bad. But again, you know, we're all 18, 19 years of old, out enjoying ourselves, and all of a sudden war started. You were through into the middle of it, and you had to learn, and you learned on the hoof. Nobody knew how to plant bombs, nobody knew how to fire guns. People just learned on the hoof in total defence of the earth. So that whole, there was a whole progress for me. I mean, transition from sort of way at military type thinking right into sort of way dabbling and looking into the politics of stuff, becoming a wee bit more aware of stuff. And then as we went along, you know, I mind having the debate with Bobby Sands on the blanket. I was in the cell with Bobby for a while. And the whole thing of 1916, was it a sacrifice or was it madness and all this in the end of the day, you know what I mean? And I was totally 100% in agreement. Yes, what they done was 100%. Bobby was talking politics, you know, the Conley sort of line, you know. And I mean, I might argue this debate went on for about 2 days, you know, but it was all that starting that whole process of thinking, you know what I mean? Is there more till just bombs and guns here? Do we need to go somewhere else, you know what I mean? And then that's when I started to realise we're not going to, you know, we're not going to put the Brits or the Brits aren't going to put us down either. So it was a whole learning process right along.
First thing, I remember 69, I was 13 in 69, so pretty young. And the things that always just sitting here thinking was coming out with me was one, when I left school, I was supposed to stay on school, but I couldn't. I was supposed to stay on, but I had to get out. So at 15, so into the big world, and I started trying to get a job type of thing. And that's one of the things that struck me about this state. I remember Grundig's, going out to Grundig's an interview, and I think they brought in new legislation. You couldn't ask outright know what religion somebody was. So just ask me what primary school you went to. I said St. Teresa's Primary. I think that finished your chance of getting a job. And then the next thing that really struck me was Bloody Sunday. I think had a big impact on a lot of people my age. What happened on that Sunday? And the rad went on for a full week. You know, just constant rad in the Tappamun Road. And then Kelly's later that year, we were involved in Fianna and I at the time. The Kellys blew up, and the areas were coming on a sniper attack. I thought some snipers were on the mountains, actually shooting down as well from the mountains. I sitting with binoculars looking up, trying to find them. And that's the first time I ever seen an AR-18, holding, but it was very impressive at the time. And I graduated in the IRA in 74 and sentenced in March 77, straight onto the blanket. I remember 79. I always thought that blanket men became very, very cynical at times, you know. And we were actually talking about elections then. We were talking about elections, and basically the Dark was telling me we need to be re-educated. You know, and so, but as you come on through it, you've seen the sort of need sort of become involved in the political aspect of the struggle. The struggle's not just purely military. The military is the means, it's only the means to that political objective, as I see. Then the watershed, I think, was the hunger strike, 81, and Bobby's election that year. And that sort of, to me, that sort of kick-started it. The Republican movement now sees that they have to move away from this entirely military struggle into a more political struggle to harness that support and bring it on board. And you can see that in jail even after the blanket protest, the sort of lecturing around that sort of issues of becoming more and more involved in politics.
I think that's pretty well outlined already. You've brought us in here directly and talking about the hunger strikes and the political development, or the electoral development. I'd just like to ask Pat about his early days of struggle and his development or his evolution.
Well, I suppose like everyone else, I mean, I was very young in 1969. I was 11. I had just left St Gall's in June that year in '69, and then everything really erupted shortly after that. Bombay Street was burnt. St Gall's was at the end of Bombay Street, the junction with Waterville Street. But you know, and remember we used to go to Mass in Clonard, and I remember my dad taking us round to see Bombay Street, you know, just all the houses, burnt out shells. And I suppose what was happening around us was politicising us all. It was impacting on our consciousness. You know, in a way we all understood that we weren't really equal in the state, but, you know, 69 and the outbreak of the conflict and so on drove it all home. And then in 71 you had internment, and I mean we just lived a couple of hundred yards from where the Ballymurphy massacre was taking place, and then Eddie mentioned Bloody Sunday, and I remember that having a big, I remember exactly what seat I was sitting in the house when the news was coming in on that Sunday evening about what had happened in Derry, and I suppose at the time just feeling real anger about it, and those were the things that were influencing all of us. And I got involved. I was involved in the Fianna around Clonard. That was the sort of closest area to me. And then later on in the army. But in terms of a sort of a view about elections, I didn't really have a strong view one way or the other. But as time went on, I began to feel that we needed some sort of electoral validation of what was happening, of the struggle, you know. It was easy for our enemies to say we had no support. And, you know, if you remember, that was Thatcher's war cry at the time of the hunger strike, that the IRA has no support and the prisoners have no support. And if you remember, you know, I ended up in the blocks in 79, early 79, and from the day an hour I went in, hunger strike was the black cloud that just hovered over the blocks. Everybody thought it was going to happen at some time. In one sense, you wanted to get the thing over and done with. On the other hand, you never wanted it to happen at all. And I suppose, I've said this before, one of the happiest days of my life was spent in prison, right? In a small cell. By that time, the No Wash protest had ended in April 1981. Bobby was on the hunger strike. Word came in that he was going to be standing in the Fermanagh South Tyrone by-election. And I was glad to hear that. I was also apprehensive because if Bobby hadn't have won that election, that would have been a massive blow. Even if he'd have lost it by 1 vote, Thatcher would have been out saying, even your own people don't support you. And I always remember that day when the result came in. PV Coyle from Derry had the radio in our wing, and everybody was warned, irrespective of what this result is, there's to be no shouting or roaring or anything, because the screws will come down, they'll know over radio and they'll come down looking at it. And PV Coyle read or got up to the door and shouted the result out. And you know, was doing all these competitions, you know, he read out Harry West's vote first, and then he read Bobby's, the number of votes that he had got, you know, and to me, and there was no shouting in our wing at all. I heard other wings weren't as disciplined, you know, but that's understandable. Our wing was very, very disciplined. You know, I remember just feeling, you know, the people of Fermanagh and South Tyrone have vindicated and validated everything we have been through here for the last 5 years, you know. And well, when you think of the impact it had, not just here but internationally, it was, you know, in my view, it's probably one of the single biggest events of the last 50 years. And of course, after that, Sinn Féin started contesting elections and went from strength to strength right through the 80s and 90s. And you see, what people miss sometimes is that the whole aim of criminalisation was to isolate and marginalise Republicans, and ultimately to defeat the IRA and the struggle overall. And what was the outcome of criminalisation? It was actually the opposite, because the election of Bobby and the deaths of the hunger strikers inspired thousands and thousands of young people, and still continues to inspire young people to join the struggle, to the extent that now we're the single biggest party on this island. You know, and who would have thought that 40 years ago, landing H blocks, that was going to be the outcome of the whole criminalisation process that had the opposite effect. It popularised the struggle. There's more Republicans now on this island than there have ever been, and we're within touching distance of our objective of a united and independent Ireland. So,
for a call, Pat. Thanks for the introduction of yourselves. My view in the world would be that there are stereotypes, and somehow or other people think, she was in Armagh, actually those Republicans, you know, that's what they do, they protest and they do time in prison. He was in Long Case and he was on the blanket, you know, somehow or other. But it's not, you were a father or a sister or a brother or an ordinary just person in the street or a neighbour of somebody who was thrown into situations and then had to deal with the situations. And I think it's important for us to humanise ourselves as opposed to, we were Republicans. Somehow or other Republicans do that. No, Republicans are put into situations where they have to cope, and this is the result of it. What I would really like to do is to try and get, you know, somehow or other we did get you were in the cages, you were in the Maidstone, you were in the H blocks, you were an activist in the street. How did you feel at the time? Did you think you were making history, or, you know, what? Did you think that you would win if whatever win would? Did you ever envisage the like of this fellow who was in jail with you ever being an elected representative? I'm just wondering, you know, that aspect of stuff as opposed to the IRA person.
I mean, a big thing it had a big impact on me psychologically. It had to think of the IRA realised, you know, the first thing we're talking about victories. You know, you all remember the posters, Victory 71, Victory 72, Victory 7. I mean, the IRA released these posters on an annual basis. And we were, I mean, at that stage, you really hadn't got time to sit back and reflect and think about victories, because basically, as everybody knows, you know, we were living in a war zone. You know what I mean? We were living on the run. We were moving from house to house and street to street. So you really hadn't got time to sit back and think politics. But I think there was a realisation, and the thinking that came from within the cages again, from the thinkings of the likes of the Jerry Oz at the Arts of the world. You know what I mean? See these annual victories. Number one, psychologically, it was gearing our people up. Volunteers are going our base. Victory doesn't come. You know, the Brits also knew it too and played on. So I think that whole type of thing of a short-term victory basically was set to the side, and for all the obvious reasons, because we weren't getting a victory in 72, 73. We were winning small battles along the road in the war. There was no politics involved in it. You know, the whole political. My mind, I think, was later in hindsight, a quote of Mick McVeary, who we all know was a very active IRA volunteer in South Armagh, was killed in South Armagh. He quoted one time at a speech in the early 70s, 70, maybe 71, that there'll come a day when the war ends and we're going to have to sit down and talk politics with our enemy. You know, and see me look at that. I mean, that's the type of, we had forward-thinking people, even way back then. Mick McVeary knew it then. Joe Cahill the same, you know. The war was easy, the peace is going to be harder, you know. So basically, you know, when you think on it, it probably was easier during the war. People would say, how really was it? Because we didn't have to think politics. We didn't have to do what we're doing now. You know, everything we do now, you have to watch exactly your P's and Q's. You know, I mean, our elected reps, you know, I mean, the spit in the street is world headlines, you know what I mean? During the war, we didn't have to think that, you know, and but the realisation as you go along was, you know what I mean, this war job, it just can't go on and on and on, you know. That basically, to me, sort of came back on me when I was in jail, not when I was out, and you start to sit in jail, you start to listen to your people talking, you know what I mean? You reflected back on people within the cages who were older, people who were sort of more militaristic, and then you were listening to the darks of the world, the Jerry Oz, who were more, you know, revolutionary thinking, more forward thinking, you know. So it was all that coming on board, you know. So that's the way I felt at the time.
Anne-Marie, from the Armagh perspective, was there much discussion on the electoral possibilities, on the world politic in general? Could you give me an idea of how it was, that aspect, as opposed to our living?
There wouldn't have been much conversation around politics in Armagh prison in the early years. It would have been more coping with people being on remand and being sentenced, and people who were planning to take part in the work protest, and that continued. And then the discussion as things went on was more about the Sinn Féin and how Sinn Féin always existed on the outside. So we started working towards that. So we were becoming more politicised among the women and holding classes at night time, just through the spy hole and discussing different issues, you know. And then during the No Wash protest, it was taken up with that time, and it was it was like a militant time, although it was inside, but it was militant because it was like fighting the screws every single day. Every day they had issues of trying to criminalise prisoners who weren't criminals, you know, and the way I see it, I couldn't be criminalised no matter what they would have done. I couldn't have been criminalised because there was no member of my family were ever criminals, you know, throughout any generation that I knew of. So it wouldn't have fitted well with me at all. I was very indignant about the whole criminalisation policy and the very idea that a prisoner of conscience should be brought under such a label. So there was absolutely no doubt that the no work protest had to happen, and we wouldn't accept criminalisation. The No Wash protest happened because all the women were beaten up on the 7th of February 1980. There were 30 male screws sent on to B-Wing, and they had full-length shields, and they attacked the women really, really badly and heavily. And at one point there was one lifted me up and threw me right over his shoulder. So I was knocked out on the ground for a bit until some of the girls sort of gathered round again, put in the association room until we were all brought one at a time back to our cells. There were a lot of injuries, and later on that afternoon, the screws went to different cells and took out like one person at a time. They took out Rosie Kelly and they took out Eileen Morgan. They come up to our cell and 2 male screws jumped on me and held me down, and there was other ones got Eilish O'Connor and they took her out of the cell. So that was basically people that were supposed to be appearing in front of the governor for some report or other, something petty. And on the way, when they carried them down 2 flights of stairs to the governor's office, they basically abused them and bumped them off the sidewalk and the railings and the stairs and everything, and then threw them into cells on their own. So Eilish didn't come back into our cell until that night at lockup about 8 o'clock. And I always remember, I was in the cell with Eilish O'Connor nearly 5 years during the whole time she was in, and Eilish probably would have been the strongest prisoner at the time that would have been there, and she would have been the very strongest in the way of protesting. There was no weakness with Eilish. She was a very strong woman, and she came back into the cell that night and she was pure white, and she just said the kicking they gave her, when they put her in the cell on her own, and she was still really sore from it. And I actually cried that night. I didn't let her see it, but I turned away and I cried, and I thought, my God, bringing such a strong person, to that. And it kept you very much in touch with the H-Block men. We were hearing from them every day in the week through comms and what they were going through, and that was horrifying for women like Eilish and Rita Bateson and Anne Bateson, people who had brothers on the blanket, and they were always wondering, were they getting beatings, and everybody was thinking, coming towards the end of 79 and into 80, people were saying, we were saying every day, somebody's going to be killed in the H-Blocks, the beatings they're getting. Some of the men are going to be murdered by the screws in the H-Blocks. How are they surviving it? We didn't even understand how they were surviving it. And although we were going through a hard time, it's a wee bit like the female attitude always is thinking of the men. Like my mum had 5 sons, 5 daughters, but everything was always about her sons, and so it was very, very much like that. No matter what we went through, it was always like, how are them men surviving, how are they getting through this? So when it came the time of the hunger strike, I put my name down, went down to visit, looked at my mummy, and she said, please don't go on hunger strike. And there was tears in her eyes. And I thought, oh my God, if me getting arrested had her really ill, what would this do? So I just said, no, I'm not. So that was it. Then I took my name back off. So everybody had individual reasons. Everybody had their own backgrounds, their own family reasons for not doing a thing or for doing it. But very much it left the people who didn't go on hunger strike, it left them feeling very, very wanton, very that, they had let themselves down, they had let the movement down, they had let their comrades down. So behind that was that they gave full strength to the hunger strikers. So on the 1st of December 1980, we had 3 women went on hunger strike. It was Mairead Farrell, Mairead Nugent and Mary Doyle. And they had thought about that. That was strategised in such a way that it would make the most impact. And at that point, the men were already on hunger strike since the 27th of October, and they were becoming very seriously, deteriorating bodily and seriously ill. So when the 3 women went on hunger strike, it affected the women bodily as well, much as the men being on hunger strike affected us, but actually seeing 3 women becoming more emaciated every day. We walked around the yard with them for that 1 hour that we got out, and we seen them, and you looked through their spy hole and asked how they were, and the 3 of them were put into one cell together. So it had an awful effect. It was hard. It was actually heartbreaking to watch them, and hearing the news about the men too and how badly they were. So I remember then coming up to Christmas, the 18th of December, the hunger strike was called off in the Long Cache, and the women still didn't come off the hunger strike until the following day or the day after that, because the prison had refused to allow Danny Morrison in to give them the news, the official news, that the men had finished the hunger strike. So we did get paperwork underneath the cell door at that time, showing us that there were conditions for ending hunger strike, and that there would be people wearing their own clothes, there would be different work sorted out, there would be education facilities, and we were given this note. But it was an exciting time, much as people were worried about Sean McKenna and how he was doing. But within like one day of reading the small print, you knew that it was a con. It was a con job, basically, again from the British government, which was expected. So then we went on to March 1st, when the second hunger strike started, led by Bobby Sands. And I would say our happiest day in jail ever was the day Bobby was elected as well. I mean, we were so excited, we were cheering everything. We thought, you know, the government has to listen to an elected representative. So well, we know how that ended with the 10 men dying, and we were all really, you know, really shattered over that. But something good had to come out of that, and the good that did come out of that was the movement. It gives that onus for the strength of movement from militarism to politics, and that was powerful. That was very, very powerful, and that's what the hunger strikers left us. So again, the respect for that and the strength that had to go, you know, through that. So we had our Sinn Féin common within Armagh prison from that time. And we're very much in contact then with people outside who were working on the streets. And we went in, some of us went in, young girls at 17, and hadn't a clue about issues, big issues. And all of a sudden we had these letters coming in telling us, you have to be aware of housing issues and educational issues and health issues and all the issues that were involved in politics, the real nitty-gritty grind of everyday life that people really need, you know. Before Sinn Féin went into politics, where was the money going from Belfast City Council? Where was the money going from Stormont? Because the Catholic areas didn't get anything, the Catholic schools didn't get anything. There were no amenities on our roads. And now we look, and as Eddie said, you know, there's money going into schools, into health, into education, into facilities. But all I could finish that by saying is get casement built.
There's a thing.
It's been long enough. It's been long enough.
Pat, there's all jargon tied in around peacemaking and peace building, and conflict transformation seems to be a really magic term. And as far as I've been concerned, I have my own view of what conflict transformation means. It means what you were talking about, you know, from the militant to the accepting of another way to the acting out another way. Pat, what I mean. Could you have ever, as a younger man in the H blocks, I keep thinking, if we can transport ourselves back into the late 1970s, could you ever have imagined people voting for you? And I don't mean that in a jokey sense. I mean, did you ever see you standing as an elected representative and going up to Stormont? I mean, would it even have occurred to you?
The short answer is no.
Yeah.
I mean,
but would you have seen somebody else going to be able to do it as opposed to you?
well, I suppose Bobby's election
Yeah.
changed everything. You know, that we then realised there was an alternative almost to the armed struggle. Although not at that time, but as things progressed, we could envisage it. But I suppose you have to remember, I mean, it was the political conditions here that shaped all of us. We were a downtrodden minority who had been abandoned by the Free Staters, discriminated against up here, and then our civil rights denied, and then our human rights abused when we came out to protest on the streets and so on. And when I think back at times, and I already mentioned, you know, internment, just people being trailed out of their beds and thrown into prison, the bloody Sundays, the Ballymurphy massacre, the Spring Hill massacre, you know, the torture in places like Castlereagh and so on, and the blanket and the no wash protest and the hunger strikes. And I mean, I think back on it, sometimes you just break out in a cold sweat, and you wonder even, how the hell did we get through all that?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And aren't there more people, you know, who didn't get through, you know, and many people are suffering psychologically still as a result, and post-traumatic stress syndrome and all of that. But what amazes me is that there aren't many more, that people who have come through it and survived physically and psychologically. I mean, I doubt if there's anybody who is totally unscathed. We're all carrying some sort of baggage from those days. But I was reading an article there from Phoblanc, I think it's out the next edition, just sort of wondering what the writer given. Just write something about the hunger strike, 600 or 700 words, and so I mean, what am I going to write? I mean, everybody knows the history, so you're trying to come at it from a personal angle. I ended up writing about the day I got the call to tell me I was replacing Big Doc on hunger strike. And I don't even remember the precise date. I mean, it was obviously between the day Big Doc died and the day I started. So it was early August sometime. Don't even remember who gave me the call, but I just remember in the cell, standing there and opening it. I knew what it was. It was something I had wanted never to come, but at the same time, I wanted some certainty about what was happening, because I had been expecting to be on the hunger strike earlier, and I hadn't received any word. And I ended up writing the Pic, who ironically was in the same block as me, and saying, in H3 at that time, and saying, what's happening here, Pic? I mean, I expected some sort of word before now, and nothing has come. And he wrote back and said that some people felt that psychologically I wasn't ready for hunger strike, given the circumstances around my sister Louise being diagnosed with a terminal illness and had been given 5 or 6 years to live. And I wrote back to Vic and said, listen, forget about that. I'm ready psychologically. I'm strong, and I'm ready to go at any time. So, I mean, I got that calm. I knew what it was before opening it, and my heart was in my mouth when I was opening it. And at the top of it, it was addressed to volunteer Pat Sheehan, right? And I mean, I almost stood up straight and pulled the shoulders back and what have you, because, I mean, I have always been, at that time and even now, it's always been a source of pride to me that I was a volunteer in the Irish Republican Army, that I took up arms to resist the malign and oppressive occupation of this country. Although I suppose that sort of sense of pride that came to me was quite fleeting, because it then struck me, well, usually the only time you see volunteer in front of anybody's name is on a headstone in the graveyard or in the obituary columns or something. So that sort of brought me back down a bit. But it then went on to say, you volunteered to go on hunger strike, and you've been selected to replace volunteer Kieran Doherty. If you have any second thoughts, stand aside now, and nothing less will be thought of you. And so you were being given an out, If you have any doubts at all, stand aside. Nobody will say anything. And and do you have doubts? Well, I mean, I wrote in the article, the doubt is to be human. You're going into uncharted territory. How do you know how you're going to respond? After 10 days or 20 days or whatever. But I mean, I was confident enough in my own commitment to the struggle, and the fact that I have a bit of a stubborn streak in my own character that would get me over any bumps in the road. And then, also said in this article, I mean, I don't know what it's like to be sentenced to death, and obviously I've never had a terminal medical diagnosis, but I felt I was somewhere in the same ballpark, because the final lines of the column were, if you decide to go ahead with this course of action, you'll be dead in 2 months. And that was it. nothing about, you know, we don't know how this is going to work out, you could die or whatever. It was just stark, it was black and white. And it's a bit like Genty talking about the war was easier, because in the war everything is black and white, you know, there's no grey areas. And this was the same, it was black and white. And I mean, I always think I was lucky to survive the hunger strike. I ended up then, at the time I started the hunger strike on the 10th of August, 9 men had already died, and Mickey Devine would die 10 days later. And I then was on hunger strike until the last day, the 3rd of October. By that stage, it was 55 days. I weighed about 7 stone. I was almost totally blind, completely yellow with jaundice. My liver was enlarged and beginning to shut down. In fact, I'd been examined by a consultant on the Wednesday, the 3rd of October was a Saturday. They used to bring a consultant in from, there were 2 of them came in, one from the Royal and one from the city, that examined us every week. And on the Wednesday he said to me, he says, look, your liver has become enlarged, it's starting to shut down. He says, and I can't guarantee, even if you end your hunger strike now, that you'll survive. There could be irreparable damage done to your liver. So, but as I say, the hunger strike ended, I recovered, and in some ways I attribute it to the fact that there was some reluctance or concern about me going on hunger strike because of my sister's condition. So there may have been a delay in selecting me to go on hunger strike. So I suppose that's fate, that's the way things turn out, and I survived. But in those days, could you imagine the situation that we're in today? No, not at all. I mean, I remember a few years ago, after I got out of jail the second time and my football and hurling career was over, I actually took up skiing. There was a crowd of us from
bourgeois.
This is
bourgeois.
This is, it's an Irish one.
For this we fought. For this we fought.
But we were in Andorra. It was a whole crowd. It was a crowd of lads from about the road all going up at a crack. And people think you just go for the drinking and the crack and that. But the skiing's the big thing, and anything else is a bonus. But one day, it was actually New Year's Day, and you go up the mountain in the chairlift, and then something happened and the chairlift broke down for a few minutes, and we're sitting waiting on the rest of the lads coming up. And I just lay down on the snow, and it was clear blue sky, crystal clear, and you could, even though it was the 1st of January, you could feel the heat from the sun on your face, you know. And I just thought back to where we had come from, where we had been, you know, lying in cells with our own shit on the wall, getting beaten and brutalised by the screws in the prison, and then the hunger strike, and all of that. And you're lying there thinking, you know, life couldn't get much better than this. And when you think of where we have come from and where we are now, I mean, it's a totally different world. I mean, the Orange State is gone. Anybody who tries to argue that there's no difference now and what things were like back in the 70s and 80s, I mean, they're just deluded, or they're blind, or they don't want to recognise what has happened. And that's where we are. I never imagined, I had no ambition to be an elected representative, but I suppose all of us come from a generation where you get a tap on the shoulder and somebody asks you to do a job. In my case, it was Big Bobby, and Marty arrived at my house one night and says, come and talk to you. Here's me, what have I done? Or what are you looking? So they said about Jerry was going to be standing down and asked me would I be willing to take his place. And to be honest, I never had considered standing for election. But of course, what happens is they make the argument and call on your sense of duty, and you know, and so it was after a few days I agreed to it. Bit of strong arm tactics, and that was it. So, but it's definitely a change situation, and even in that space of time that I have been there, just over 10 years, the situation even within the Assembly has changed. The Unionists have lost their majority, their majority in the Assembly. We now see the chaos that they're in, and you know, talk about a United Ireland is absolutely mainstream now. You know, and I mean, I've no doubt we're within touching distance of United Ireland. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Will we ever one day wake up and say that's the struggle over? We've won. It's all done and dusted. No, because you know, struggle never ends. It's like the Greek myth of Sisyphus, the man who has to roll the boulder up the hill, and then it rolls back down, and he has to go down and push it back up again. And that's the nature of struggle. We'll sort one element out, and then there'll be something new to sort out, and that's just what we're involved in, have been involved in all our lives.
So I'll wear no convict uniform, nor meekly serve my time, that Britain might brand Ireland's fight 800 years of crime.